So now we're going to code our pop method. So we'll start it out like this. And remember, we had three scenarios where we had 0 items, 1 item, or 2 or more items. So I'm going to start with the easiest one, which is an empty linked list. And the way we deal with this is just to test to see if the list is empty. We can do it like this, or this dot head equals null, or this dot length equals 0. We'll return undefined. So we'll drop this out of here. And now let's look at if we have 2 or more items. So we showed in the last video we were going to create 2 different variables, temp and pre. We'll create them like this. Let temp equal this dot head, and let pre equal this dot head as well. And then we're going to loop through this. I'm going to use a while loop here. You could use a for loop here because you're just going through the entire length of the linked list. So you could use the number that you have stored in this dot length. But I like using the while loop here because we're just doing this while temp.next is true. And since this is a null terminated list, we're going to go until the pointer is going to be null. So temp.next, if you look at the diagram, the 11 node there, that's that arrow there that I just highlighted. And then we're going to say pre equals temp. And for the first iteration through the loop, pre is already set equal to temp. So this doesn't change anything. And then we'll say that temp equals temp.next, which is going to move temp over. So let's move this down like this, and we'll walk through this all the way to the end of the list. So we'll say, well, temp.next is true, which means there is a node that that arrow is pointing to. We'll set pre equal to temp. It's already equal to temp. So in this iteration, it's not going to do anything. And then temp equals temp.next, which moves temp over. And let's just walk through this all the way to the end, highlighting the line of code that is being used as things are moving on the diagram. So while temp.next, we're going to move pre up and temp over. And then check to see if there's a node there, and we'll do it again. And then this will be the last time that this is going to come up true. And we're going to move pre and temp. And this time, this is going to be false. And this is where pre and temp are left after we run the while loop. So for now, I'm going to remove temp. I'll bring this back, but that's going to be pointing at that for node. And we want to set tail equal to pre. We do that with this line of code. This dot tail equals pre. That was the only thing we were using pre for, so I'm going to just drop this out of the diagram. We'll say tail.next is equal to null, and that breaks that for off of the list there. So let's take a look at this code. Remember, we created these 2 variables. And now let's look at this with the rest of the code that we have so far. And next thing is to decrement the length. And remember, we do have one edge case that we haven't addressed, and that is if we have 1 item in the list. And if we do have 1 item in the list, head and tail both are going to point to it. And we had said that temp and pre were going to be equal to head, so those are both going to point to that 1 node. So let's just walk through the rest of the code here, just from the while loop down. Okay, so I'm going to back up here. So what those first 3 lines, we've already run those. So these are the ones that are left. And let's run through these and see what happens when you only have 1 item. And it'll become obvious what we have to do when we have 1 item in the list. So we're going to run while temp.next. Well, temp.next is null. So the while loop is not going to run at all. So we can remove that. And that's all that we're going to use the temp variable for. So I'm just going to drop that out of the diagram there. So this dot tail equals pre, well, they're already pointing at the same item. So that doesn't really change anything. So we can remove that line. Okay, then we have this dot tail dot next equals null. So tail dot next is already equal to null. That's not going to change anything. So we're done with that line of code. And the only thing left is this dot length minus minus, which decrements the length. It was 1, and it decrements the length to 0. But notice that head and tail are still pointing to that 1 node. And obviously, if we've popped that off, head and tail should be pointing to null. So let's go back to our code here. And the thing that we have to change here is to say if this dot length equals 0, and remember this is 0 after we've decremented it here, then what we need to do is we need to set head and tail equal to null, which gives us this, which is exactly what we want. The only thing left to do is to return temp, which is the item that we popped off, and we return that. So let's go back and look at our code, and let's flip over to DevTools and look at this code over there. Okay, so here is our pop method. This if statement here at the top is for when we have 0 items in our linked list. The code from here to here works if we have 2 or more items. And then we have this if statement here for our edge case of only having 1 item. So what I've done here is I have a linked list that is just going to have 2 items, and the nodes are just going to be 1 and 2. And I'm going to run this. So let's take a look at this linked list real quick. I'm going to make this a little larger here. Let's open this up. So the head is pointing to the node with a value of 1, and tail is pointing to 2. We have a length of 2. So this is going to make it easy for us to test having 2 or more items, pop that off, then having 1 item, then 0 items. So we can run the pop method 3 different times and test all 3 of our different scenarios. Okay, I'm going to clear this off. So I'm going to say myLinkedList.pop. I press enter. And as we would expect, it's returned the 2 node. Now let's type in myLinkedList. And what we have remaining in the linked list is the 1 node has both head and tail pointing to it and a length of 1. So that works for having 2 or more nodes. So let's clear this off, and we will run pop again. And we press enter, and it returns that 1 node. If we look at my linked list, now we have an empty list. Head and tail both point to null. The length is 0. So let's run pop one more time to see if this works correctly when we have 0 items in here. And it is indeed returning undefined. So all 3 of our scenarios are working, which means we have a working method for pop.